Bluebird, bluebird, take this letter down south of me. I don't want you to stop flying.
I'm out here in East Texas. I'm just a few feet from the land where my grandparents were born. And so in a lot of ways, Bluebird was born on this land here, in this red dirt. The book is a love letter to Black Texans, and it is a piece of East Texas culture and lore and all of that I wanted to share with readers. It's very special to me and is probably in some ways the most personal thing I've ever written. I come from a long line of Black Texans. And in fact, my family story is the flip side of the Great Migration. If we, a lot of us know a lot of stories about Black folks getting out of Dodge in the South and getting out of the Jim Crow South to go to Chicago, Detroit, Gary, New York, Phoenix, California. My family stayed, and we are defined by the fact that we stayed. And part of that, there's a line in the book that's about the main character's family, which you could say the same about my family. That there was this sense that a feeling that we somehow had the stones to endure hard shit, and so that was probably the most Texan thing about us. That we basically could not be run off. That we had land, we were going to farm that land, and my family basically out of growing cotton and corn on their own land, put a bunch of people through college, graduate school, made lawyers, army colonels, professors, and all this coming up out of the dirt. And so for me, my love for Texas comes from a very kind of agrarian place and an appreciation for my ancestors' stick-to-itiveness and fortitude and willingness to say no. You need to say no. In fact, the book is dedicated to all of my ancestors, and I just added who said no. Because there is a flip side to stand your ground. There is the way we imagine it when we think of awful stories and awful human beings like George Zimmerman. But there's another side to stand your ground, which can be, you could be talking about Texas or the country itself, which is, I built this and I'm not going anywhere. And the state is not going to be defined by its worst impulses. It is, I like to call it Louisiana's fraternal twin, because it's right along the border, and it has infinitely more in common with the South than it does with the Southwest. It's not big sky country, it's not dusty ranches or anything like that. They call it the Big Thicket. It's full of woods and piney woods and bayous and just creeks with cypress trees and moss and all this kind of stuff. So it looks a little bit more like Louisiana, and so it is its own particular thing. And from that, you could say that it also, like the South, has had in its history a virulent strain of racism. That my family certainly grew up around. But what I also know to be true about the South and about Black and white folks in the South is that, which I tried to capture in the book, which is the sense of the contradiction, the sense of, yes, Jasper, Texas is real. What happened to James Byrd is real. Yes, oh my God, Sandra Bland, that is real. But there is also, in an everyday sense, there's a sense of Black and white folks, the ways in which they interact with each other, that is familial, for better or worse. It's just you've been living up against each other for hundreds of years. So I've said before that I have a theory in a certain way that part of the reason why shit jumps off in the American South is that people are actually living up under each other. Whereas a city like Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So I think when you're actually living up under each other, you get both the familial side of it and you also get the cantankerous, contentious trouble. He's a Black Texas Ranger. I have said my whole life I would never write a cop. I just felt like it's not my worldview. But I also just didn't think I had a worldview that I could see the world through the lens of institutional authority. but when I was thinking about that, I wanted to do this series along Highway 59. Each book a different town, a different story. Because all of my family is from towns along Highway 59 in East Texas. I knew that I needed a character that was somehow could move from, up and down this highway. And I was thinking, who has that kind of authority? And the Texas Rangers, fundamentally, they're on the range. That's what they do. They are not necessarily bound. They're bound by region to a certain degree, but not necessarily. They can get called in anywhere at any time. Well, I've never been a ranger, and I certainly, I talked to one, and I certainly did my share of research, but then also gave myself permission to make shit up. But what I do understand is that any kind of, whether you're talking about the Army or police beat or even firemen, the collective and the group, people survive by assuming a common identity, that we're all kind of in this together. But if you are a woman, and there at any given time, I think right now there are only 150 or 152 rangers. It's a finite number at all times, and in order for there to be more rangers, like the state legislature has to pass a law for you to add numbers. And there actually are black rangers. There are maybe, out of that 150, 152, maybe 6 or 7 of them. There are maybe 13 Latinos, but there's 2 women. So the idea that you can be all ranger first, or you could be in a group where you put that common identity first, doesn't quite work if you're only one of 2 women in the whole thing. And if you're one of a handful of black folks, it doesn't quite work that way, even though that's the culture. Geneva Sweet runs Geneva Sweet Sweets. It's a cafe. She's known for her fried pies, and basically it's essentially a black cafe on the highway that's been there since the late 60s and was born of an idea of when black folks traveling the highway couldn't stop anywhere else, they could stop in her place. And it's an eclectic, there's a jukebox there playing blues and Charlie Pride country, and there is the regulars that are sitting there having their coffee and all this kind of stuff. There's also a little section off to the side where you can get a haircut if you're on the road. It's kind of an eclectic place, and she's been there for years. She is a widow. Her husband was not a famous blues guitarist, but somebody was on his way to fame when he met her and gave up everything to park it and lark and to make a life with her. And she lives across the street from a man named Wally Jefferson, who lives in an exact replica of Monticello, who thinks quite highly of himself. He's a very wealthy, although it's not clear where he gets his money from, a very wealthy white man in, $800 horn gator boots, just, the kind of guy that walks in with the swagger and the big belt buckle, and he and she, they are across the street from each other, and they've known each other for 40, 50 years, and there is a sense of the familial intention about them, but also familiar. He's like a bully that she tolerates. He owns almost all the land in this little town, but he doesn't own where her place is, and he's kind of on her every now and then to sell it to him, and you kind of get a sense he's just doing it to mess with her, but they're not friends. And her way of tolerating his bullish behavior is to give him nothing. I firmly believe I became a writer on Highway 59. And what I mean by that is, Southerners, you're going to go see some relatives on the weekend. I mean, that's usually going to be doing that. So I would say at least 2 weekends out of the month, we were driving up to see folks. And so to see my grandmother, to see aunts and uncles. And this is, clearly pre-iPads in the back seat or iPhones or anything, and I could never read in a car because it makes me want to puke. So what I had was my imagination, and so I vividly remember riding through these towns and them passing by really fast, but you catch a glimpse of something interesting. You catch a glimpse of somebody's little beauty box, beauty salon run out of their trailer. You come across, a huge cattle ranch, and you think, God, that looks like Dallas, and I would just make up stories about the stuff that I saw that was passing by, and that was as a girl. And so when I was working, I was in season 2 of Empire when I came up with the idea for the season, and I wrote a book proposal to just see if somebody wanted to help me publish it. I had a profound feeling of wanting to go home. that as much fun as Empire is one of the most fun things I've ever done in my entire life, but it could not be more different than who I fundamentally am. As much fun as I was having, I just felt like I want to go home. I want to go home. I'm very moved. Thank you very much to the Mystery Writers of America. I've been in this room before, I have to be honest, and have looked out and not really seen myself. My books are very Black, very Texan, and I've not always known that there was a place for that here. So I'm deeply moved. I can't believe I'm standing here. I do want to, since this is kind of wrapping stuff up, I will say this, that there is a reason why crime fiction at this moment in time is the most exciting pocket of publishing across the globe. And the reason why, in my opinion, is that I've always believed, frankly, that every novel is a crime novel, because in every way a novel is dealing with a crime of the heart, a crime of passion, a moral crime. But I think what crime fiction offers us is a way to look at how we navigate shared space on the planet, and I think it is a way to look at the foolishness of the idea of scarcity, that there's not enough resources, there's not enough money, there's not enough food, there's not enough love for everybody. And I think crime fiction is a way that we can kind of explore the ridiculousness of that being played out, where lives are lost over issues like this, when truthfully there is enough love and resources and everything to go around. Thank you. But it gets to be this interesting space where we look at our darkest impulses and perhaps, what is the way that I want to put it? To look at our darkest impulses and perhaps think of ways in which we could all be better. I'm just so thrilled by this. I don't know what else to say. Thank you so much. Thank you.